The small town of Redwood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Nestled deep in the heart of the Midwest, it was a town that time seemed to have forgotten, with its quaint, old-fashioned charm and sleepy streets. But beneath its seemingly idyllic surface, there were secrets, dark, hidden things that the townspeople preferred not to talk about. At the center of one of these secrets was the old house on Maple Street. For as long as anyone could remember, the house had stood vacant, its windows boarded up and its once pristine exterior now weathered and decayed. The locals avoided it like the plague, crossing to the other side of the street rather than walk too close. It was said that the house was cursed, that those who dared enter it were never quite the same again. For years, the house remained untouched, a relic of a forgotten past. But that all changed when the Kincaid family moved to town. David and Emily Kincaid were looking for a fresh start. After years of struggling in the city, they had decided to move to a quieter, more peaceful place where they could raise their daughter, Lily, away from the hustle and bustle of urban life. When they stumbled upon the old house on Maple Street, they were captivated by its potential. Despite its dilapidated state, they saw what it could become, a beautiful home, full of history and character. The townspeople were less enthusiastic. They warned the Kincaids about the house, sharing hushed tales of its dark past and the strange occurrences that had plagued previous occupants. But David and Emily were not easily swayed. They dismissed the stories as superstitious nonsense, convinced that the house was just an old building in need of some TLC. So, they moved in, ready to begin their new life. From the very first night, things were strange. The house seemed to creak and groan in ways that defied explanation, as if it were settling around them, watching them. Lily, usually a happy and easygoing child, became increasingly withdrawn, often staring at the walls as if she could see something that her parents couldn't. At first, David and Emily chalked it up to the stress of the move, but as the days went on, the sense of unease grew stronger. It was Emily who first began to notice the more unsettling details. At night, when the house was silent and dark, she would hear footsteps in the hallway outside their bedroom door. They were slow, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. Each time, she would nudge David awake, but by the time he stirred, the footsteps would stop, leaving only the oppressive silence in their wake. The strange occurrences didn't end there. Objects would move on their own, disappearing from one room only to reappear in another. Doors that were closed and locked would be found wide open in the morning, and the temperature in the house seemed to drop inexplicably, even on the warmest nights. Lily's behavior became more troubling as well. She started talking to someone, or something, that no one else could see. She called it, the man in the corner, describing him as tall, with long, shadowy limbs and eyes that glowed in the dark. Emily tried to dismiss it as an overactive imagination, but there was something about the way Lily spoke, something that chilled her to the bone. Then, one night, as the family sat down for dinner, the lights in the house flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. David grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the basement to check the fuse box, but when he got there, he found that nothing was wrong. The fuses were all intact, the wires untouched. It was as if the power had simply vanished. When he returned to the dining room, he found Lily standing in the middle of the room, staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, kneeling down beside her. Lily didn't answer. She just pointed upward, her hand trembling. David followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. There, etched into the ceiling, were deep, jagged scratches, claw marks, as if some enormous creature had been trying to tear its way through. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. The scratches on the ceiling were just the beginning. The strange occurrences in the house escalated, becoming more frequent, more aggressive. At night, the footsteps outside the bedroom door became louder, more insistent, and no amount of checking or locking could keep the doors closed. The temperature in the house dropped to freezing, and no amount of heating could bring it back to normal. Lily's condition worsened as well. She no longer slept through the night, waking up screaming and crying, her little body racked with terror. She would tell her parents that the man in the corner was getting closer, that he was coming for her. David and Emily tried to comfort her, but they were at a loss. They had no idea how to fight something they couldn't see, couldn't understand. Emily's own health began to deteriorate. She started having vivid nightmares, filled with images of the house as it had once been, grand and beautiful, but filled with darkness and despair. In these dreams, she would wander the halls, searching for something, but she could never find it. The dreams left her feeling drained, as if the house was slowly sapping her strength. David, ever the rational one, tried to find logical explanations for what was happening. He checked the house for drafts, faulty wiring, anything that could explain the strange occurrences. But nothing made sense. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it was playing with them, wearing them down, piece by piece. Desperate for answers, Emily reached out to the townspeople, hoping to learn more about the house's history. What she discovered was a tale of horror and tragedy that stretched back over a century. The house on Maple Street had once belonged to a wealthy family, the Thompsons, who were known for their extravagant parties and lavish lifestyle. But their fortune came at a terrible price. According to the stories, Mr. Thompson had made a deal with a dark entity, trading the souls of his family for wealth and power. The deal had backfired, and one by one, the members of the Thompson family met gruesome, untimely deaths. Their spirits were said to haunt the house, trapped there by the curse that had doomed them. The townspeople believed that the entity still lingered in the house, feeding off the fear and despair of those who lived there. Emily was horrified by what she learned, but she didn't know how to tell David. He was already skeptical of the strange things happening around them, and she feared he would dismiss the stories as nonsense. But as the days went on, it became impossible to ignore the truth. The house was changing them, warping their minds, their spirits. Emily could feel herself slipping, losing touch with reality. She began to see things, shadows moving in the corners of her vision, dark figures watching her from the windows. She knew they weren't real, but they felt real, and that was enough to drive her to the edge. One night, after another sleepless night, Emily confronted David. She told him everything she had learned, every detail of the house's dark past, every fear that had been gnawing at her since they moved in. To her surprise, David didn't dismiss her concerns. He had his own fears, his own experiences that he hadn't shared. He admitted that he had seen the scratches on the ceiling growing, that he had felt the cold presence in the house, and that he was afraid, more afraid than he had ever been in his life. Together, they made a decision. They would leave the house, take Lily, and never look back. They packed their bags that night, determined to escape before it was too late. But the house had other plans. As the Kincaids prepared to leave, the atmosphere in the house shifted, becoming even more oppressive. The temperature plummeted, and the lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder, more frantic, and the sound of something, or someone, scraping against the walls echoed through the house. Lily was the first to sense that something was terribly wrong. She clung to Emily, her small body trembling with fear. "Mommy, he's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's in the house." David tried to reassure her, but his own fear was evident in his voice. He urged Emily to take Lily to the car while he finished packing. But as they made their way to the front door, the house seemed to come alive. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the locks clicking into place on their own. The windows rattled in their frames, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Emily pounded on the door, screaming for David, but her voice was swallowed by the overwhelming silence. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, the shadowy figure appeared. It was tall and menacing, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its long, clawed fingers reached out toward them. Lily let out a terrified scream, and Emily turned to face the figure, placing herself between it and her daughter. "Leave us alone," she shouted, her voice trembling with fear. "We're leaving. We're not staying here." The figure paused for a moment, as if considering her words. Then, with a low, guttural growl, it lunged forward. Emily felt a cold, sharp pain as the figure's claws slashed across her chest. She fell to the ground, gasping for breath as darkness closed in around her. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was Lily's terrified face, her small hands reaching out to her mother. When Emily woke up, she was lying on the cold, hard floor of the living room. The house was silent, the oppressive atmosphere gone. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her chest was too much. She looked around, searching for David and Lily, but they were nowhere to be found. The house was empty. She tried to call out for them, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. Panic set in as she realized that she was alone, trapped in the house with no way out. The doors were still locked, the windows sealed shut. The figure was gone, but its presence lingered, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to seep into her very soul. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness of the house. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind clouded by fear and despair. She could feel the house around her, watching her, waiting for the moment when she would finally give in. And then, just as she was about to lose hope, she heard a voice. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it was enough to snap her out of her daze. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the pain, and listened. The voice grew louder, more insistent, until she could make out the words. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" It was Lily. With renewed determination, Emily crawled to her feet, using the wall for support. She followed the sound of her daughter's voice, moving through the dark, empty house with a sense of urgency. She knew that she had to find Lily, had to get her out of the house before it was too late. But as she reached the hallway, she stopped in her tracks. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was the figure. It was holding Lily in its arms, its glowing eyes fixed on Emily. Lily was silent, her face pale and expressionless. The figure smiled, a twisted, cruel smile, and whispered, "She's mine now." Emily's heart shattered as she watched the figure disappear into the darkness, taking her daughter with it. She tried to run after them, but her legs gave out, and she fell to the floor, her vision blurring as tears filled her eyes. She screamed, a raw, primal scream that echoed through the empty house, but there was no one there to hear it. In the end, Emily was left alone, broken and defeated, with nothing but the silence and the darkness of the old house on Maple Street. And somewhere in the distance, she could still hear Lily's voice, calling out for her mother.